be really helpful. So, as I say, we are delighted to welcome you and to have Becky Ray host our pop-up on the realities of human error. Becky, I think the best thing is if you explain how you became interested in this and then take it away. And I know you've got some questions to ask as well.
Can I say, just before Becky does that, I'd like to say something about the questions and the chat and that kind of thing.
Oh, please
So,
do.
yeah, so I know Becky's got a presentation today and it's broken into sections. There'll be a question around each section and a chance for us to have a conversation. But please do raise questions as you go along, either speak up or put them in the chat. And we'll try to manage the chat so that Becky can respond to anything that comes up as we go. And just on a personal note, Becky, I'm thrilled that you're here. I'm not going to steal your story by telling your story. Yeah, I know you're going to do that as part of what you say. It's just that Becky's background is just absolutely brilliant. And you've done some things that no other GameShift partner has done, and hardly anybody else I know has done. So I'm just delighted that you're here, and it relates completely to what you're talking about. So I'm going to get out of your way and let you tell your story. Thanks,
No
Becky.
worries. Thank you so much. And so welcome everyone. There's lots of people I don't know, but there's one chap I do know, and that's Steve Womack, and I'm very grateful that he's arrived. And I get that he probably can't put his camera on, but it means a lot that you've showed up, Steve. So I'm going to share my screen because I think it's good that you get something nice to look at. But what we're starting with is not a nice image. I mean, if anyone has ever dropped an ice cream, that is a bad day, right? And nobody would ever drop an ice cream on purpose. And this picture beautifully illustrates that the reality of human error is that human error is normal and that we all do it. So let's dive in. So I'm going to cover 4 topics today. I'm going to talk about human error, and I've got loads of examples to bring that to life. I'm going to talk about error traps, and they're the things that kind of lie in wait in our businesses and our lives to catch us. I'm going to talk about drift, but not the kind of Tokyo drift, burn all your tires up. I'm going to talk about something called organizational drift. And then I'm going to add in a bit about context and blame, because that enriches all of these stories that we've got. But who am I? A lovely introduction from both Philippa and Chris. And I have got quite a diverse background. So I started as the young girl in the yellow high-vis vest. I wore overalls. I had a van. I had a snap-on red 9-drawer toolbox. And I used to fix forklift trucks and big earth moving equipment and construction equipment. And I spent 10 years driving around construction sites, factories, production yards, you name it. If there was a forklift there, I was there in my overalls fixing it. And I absolutely loved that environment. And what it's given me is loads of empathy and compassion for frontline workforces and people that go out and do stuff with their hands. And that's the kind of businesses that I support now in my current work. So I did that for 10 years. I then moved into health and safety leadership, and I worked across a load of safety critical domains. So construction, railways, big infrastructure projects like bridges and tunnels, and worked night shifts and weekends and those kind of stuff. Worked in production, factories, anywhere that you make something, or you produce something, or you fix something, that's where I was. And then a little bit, I dabbled in a little bit of military aviation, and there's a little bit of military aviation mixed into this story today. And then what I do now is I don't get as dirty, to be fair, but I do still do all the DIY in my house and fix my own car, of course, because those skills you never lose. But I go into businesses, and all my work involves culture change. So it's culture change, but with an operational and health and safety risk related influence. Because a lot of people in culture change are from a HR background, a really people focused background. I'm really people focused, but on a setting people to work kind of focus. So that's me and my background and what's brought me to today. Whenever I do a presentation or a workshop or I bring a bunch of people together, I always get them to think about if they are a sponge or a rock. And unfortunately, a lot of the industries I work in that have been around for years and years and years, there's a lot of rocks. And then it makes this kind of culture change and this view on the world quite difficult. So if you're a sponge, we would describe you as having a growth mindset in that you are open and you soak up new ideas, new perspectives. You are curious about different perspectives and what the person next to you's view of the world is, given their background and their position. And you're just open. And for all of this stuff to land in this presentation and any kind of view like this to work, you need to be somewhat sponge-like. And if you're a rock, then you're quite a fixed mindset. You know what you know, you like what you know, and no one's going to come in and tell you any different. But what I love about my job is I love meeting a rock. And I love it when they really anchor down and go, oh, you're not going to tell me any different, love. Coming in with all your newfangled stories and new ways of looking at the world. But actually, you can turn rocks into sponges. And that is my most favorite thing to do. So have a think about if you and the people that you work with, are they sponges or they rocks? And again, my kind of view of the world and my role in the world now is not to come in and tell people what to do. Yeah, I've got a lot of experience and a lot of expertise, but it's never my job to tell anyone what to do. It's my job to offer up ideas and options and a whole buffet of ideas. And then you come and go, oh, I'll have a little bit of that and a little bit of that and a little bit of that. And you take it and then you put it into your workplace. Because I can't change a culture myself. I can only empower others to do it. And with these ideas that I'm going to share with you today, imagine it as a big pick a mix or a big buffet. You go, try a bit of that, try a bit of that, try a bit of that. So that kind of sets the scene for who I am and the kind of work and how I do it. So let's dive in. So the first concept, and to me, this is a fact and a way of life. And you need to kind of get to a point where you embed this into your belief system if you're going to be able to view the world from this new view. And that is that human error is normal, because nobody gets up in the morning and goes, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a massive error. And that error is going to cause loads of significant consequences for me, my work colleagues, and my business. I'm going to really mess up today. Nobody means to do that, but we are humans and we are fallible by our very nature, because we're not machines, we're not computers. We are equally really adaptable and flexible and innovative, and we can just get stuff done given loads of context. But we need to understand that we are fallible and we will make mistakes. Take the driver of this lorry. Do you think they woke up in the morning and went, do you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to drive my lorry straight into a bridge, damage it beyond recognition, and probably hurt a few people on the way. No, nobody ever thinks that. Yet, how many lorries did we crash into low bridges? And what I want you to consider is that there was probably an element of human error at play, and there was probably a whole bunch of context that meant it made sense for that lorry driver to drive under that bridge. Nobody's on a death wish in the morning, especially if that's the branding on the side of your truck. So what I ask you to be is to accept that human error is normal, to accept that context drives the behavior and literally driving this lorry. And we need to understand that context before we jump to blame and conclusions. So let's go back all the way back to the 1930s and 40s in World War II. And this is a B-17 bomber. And I appreciate it's a black and white picture, but can you see that's landed a little bit funny? So there's one key bit of kit that wasn't working or wasn't in play when this hit the tarmac, and that are those wheels. So as much as planes fly with wings, they land very much with wheels. But these B-17 bombers were doing a fantastic job at attacking and defending during World War II. But my golly, they were coming down and smashing into the tarmac like nobody's business. In a stretch of 22 months, there were 400 crashes of a very similar nature of this particular aircraft. And then in the US Air Force, they brought in a couple of psychologists and went, we need to look at this a bit different, because we can't just keep blaming the pilots and saying pilot error. Although there was lots of context. I mean, these pilots were knackered. It was a very high cognitive load to fly these and to work in kind of a war zone. But we're just like, oh, human error. The pilots just aren't putting the landing gear down. But having so many similar ones in a really short distance, they then decided, and this was one of the first well-known cases where we got psychologists in to start to look at and unpick some of this stuff. So again, I'm not a pilot, but this is what they could see. And the panel in front of you, the smaller one, was actually down. It's not in your front view. So if you see the first switch that's got a red box around it, the one that's more to the left, that's your landing gear. And the one on the right is your flaps on the wings, which slow the plane down before it lands. Now, they are two switches that operate in the same way. They would feel the same, they look the same, and they're in very close proximity. And the idea is that you operate both of them in a sequence. So you would put your landing gear down first, because it takes a little while for the wheels to come down and click into place. And then you would do the flaps, and then that would slow it down, and then you'd land on the wheels. What pilots were doing when they were knackered coming back from a really horrible session bombing people is they would put the flaps down thinking it was the wheels. It would slow the plane down, and then it would just hit the runway. And so the planes were hitting the runway and the wheels were nowhere to be seen. And they had 400 cases of this. And then someone said, we know human error is normal. We know people make human errors, but these pilots are the best trained. They're in the peak physical condition. Why are they doing the wrong button? They've got a training manual that says, do this button in this sequence. We've told her, what more do they want? But this is a perfect example of where they are set up to fail. This is what we would call an error trap. It makes it more likely that human error will happen because they're such close proximity and they operate and they feel and they look the same. So this spurred on the first kind of redesign and the introduction of what we call human factors, which is the interface between humans and machines and processes. And they redesigned it to look like this. So the one on the left is for the landing gear and the wheels, and they actually put a wheel on it. So it looks and feels like a wheel, and it's got a big action rather than a little flick. And up is up and down is down, because that makes sense for people, especially when you're like trying to land a plane. And then the flaps one was a bigger, more chunky one with a different feel to it. And it seems so simple, but do you know what this did? It stopped those planes crashing. Think of the money, think of the loss of life from that. And actually, they repositioned them so they were really far apart. And the wheels one was now in eye line, and that's the first one you've got to do. And the flat ones was further down. So this is the start of it. And there's loads and loads of examples in aviation and nuclear power plants where we've learned over time that if you want a person to interface with a machine, there are ways that you can build into the design, ways to make it easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing. But unfortunately, sometimes we have to learn through failure to get to this point. But there's loads of fascinating examples like this, and it's really, it's really cool to see. And this was in the 1930s, and this actually inspired Steve Jobs when he invented and released the first Macintosh computer in 1984, because they incorporated the human and machine interface into making this first Apple product as easy as possible. And if you think about why people buy Apple products now, like I've got an iPhone and I will just keep buying an iPhone. Do you know why? because it's just so easy to use. And I understand how to use it because they've built into that technology ways to catch errors and to make it easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing. And this could be a question. So, but what is human error? Like, how would you describe what human error is?
So that's an invitation, is it, for people to speak up or to put something in the chat?
Yes, of course.
Crack on, folks. I mean, Alex, I'm just really interested in the connection between what Becky's saying and your work in jazz.
That's why that's why I'm here, Chris. I want to
yeah.
know. I thought I'd better keep quiet until I learn more about Becky's wisdom, and then I can react.
I was just channeling you because I've heard you describe all those occasions where someone played the wrong note and then amazing things happen.
Well, yeah.
Anyway,
in my world, error can become a source of great creativity and innovation. But it's kind of risky business, isn't it? But, so yeah, I mean, well, there's a jazz phrase that there's actually no such thing as a wrong note, but clearly in another sector that might not be the case.
Yeah, well, think of the glue that made post-it notes. That was an error, wasn't it?
Yeah. Becky, Ed Parks has put something in the chat around human error. Oh, Ed, are you willing to speak it? Because I can't read it anymore. It's gone from the chat.
Just thinking that it's unintended or unpredicted consequences of action. If you're thinking of your brain as a kind of a prediction machine, and you didn't foresee what was going to happen on account of what you did.
Yeah, love that. So yeah, there is like an academic sort of textbook term, which is a deviation from a preferred behavior, but I always try and stay away from all that academicness, and if I can simplify it, I will. So this is my preferred description. It's just something you didn't intend to do or something you didn't mean to do, like dropping your ice cream, or like that pilot would never have intended to not put the landing gear down when he was trying to land on the tarmac. Like it wasn't something he intended to do, but yet it happened so frequently. And in the 10 years I worked in health and safety, and I investigated loads of accidents and incidents, often we would get to a point and we would just go human error and then it would stop. But now, knowing what I know now, that is just the start of an investigation. We can't stop at human error. We then need to explore all the context around that. So here's another question then. How common do you think human error is? If I had to ask you, how many human errors do you make in an hour, what would be your response?
Think that would be a lot, but we
Okay.
might not even notice them.
Yes. Awesome point, Philippa. I like to do the British Boss Life higher or lower on this part of the presentation.
Go for it. Go for it. Get people to put their hands up. Doing a higher or lower number.
Does anybody want to give us a number? We have to quantify it.
10.
10? Okay.
Is that in an hour? Yeah.
In an hour?
Yeah, I'll go for 10.
You think it's 10? Any more for any more?
20.
30?
20, 20.
20? Okay. Good guess.
I was going to say,
oh, go on.
I was just going to say, we're probably so used to making them, but we're good at sort of deviating through them. So blagging our way through them. So we could, it's probably quite hard to quantify as well.
Yeah, I love that blagging out. I like to use the term styling out. Like if you trip, you just turn it into a bit of a dance, don't you?
Exactly.
We've all got egos, and often we let our egos get in the way and we don't want to admit that we've made a mistake. But Philippa, you were spot on in that we do make a lot of errors, and I'll give you the numbers in a moment, but most of them go unnoticed. Most of them are so insignificant that we either don't notice or that they don't cause a consequence, but they can cause a consequence as big as crashing an aircraft into. It just depends where you are when you do it and what your error is. But NASA, you know, the people that put rockets in the moon to the moon and stuff, they did a study quite a while ago and tried to work out how many errors people made, and they split people into two categories. So there were skilled manual workers. So think about pilots, factory workers, mechanics, those kinds of people. And then there were knowledge workers. So people that predominantly work with computers and files in offices, in management positions. And so those two groups of people, do you think the skilled manual workers made more errors an hour than the knowledge workers?
I think the knowledge workers probably make more errors.
Okay,
Being
why do you
one, I
think that?
can because like in my daily routine, if I think about it, even writing a simple email, sometimes we have a block of perspective. Like I would read the same email over and over, but I won't spot the mistake that I've made. But if someone else is, I'm showing it to someone else, and instantly they're gonna spot it. So it's just a difference of perspective as well. We are not able to catch what we've just done or just written. So I
Yes.
think for me, it goes a lot. So.
Yeah, excellent example.
Nick, just before you
Hannah?
continue, yes, Nick was, sorry, Nick, I think put something in the chat about neglect.
Well, I agree with Shruti. It's autocorrect exists for a reason on your typing. It's because these are little and inconsequential mistakes, but they are little errors as we type away on the keyboard. And I think that if you've got those multiple mini tasks, you're more likely to make errors which are almost instantly corrected and inconsequential, as I say, than in some manual task where there's a muscle memory element that probably makes things more straightforward and less error prone.
Yeah, nice one. Thank you for that, Nick. So let me give you the results. So NASA, when they did the study, they worked out that on average, a skilled manual worker is making 5 to 7 errors an hour. And when I do this with teams, I'm like, how many hours do you do in a day? How many shifts do you do in a week? And get them to add up that number. And it's quite a shocking number. But they're knowledge workers that predominantly work with computers and files and reports and stuff. It's actually a lot higher. It's 12 to 15 per hour. And you're right, that if you're writing an email, I mean, you're all educated, intelligent people. You know how to construct a sentence. Yet when we write an email or a report or something, how far do you get without seeing that red squiggly line or the blue squiggly line? And if I took your delete key or your backspace key off your computer or your phone, how far would you get in a day without going, "Ugh, need it?" Because I work with lots of leaders and they're like, oh, no, not me. I don't. I'm really diligent and I'm really on it. And you're like, no, you're not. But it's okay because you're a human being. We make these mistakes. And you're right. It might be insignificant that you spell something wrong on an email. And what your computer does that is fascinating is it catches these errors for you. It's got inbuilt technology to catch these errors. And these are improving as we go through the years, different tricks and twists to do that. But if you were writing a report or an instruction or an order with some numerical code for a part to order, or I work with a company that mixes ingredients to make products. If we got that wrong, the knock-on effect could be the consequence of the person making that product makes it wrong, and they might mix two different substances together that shouldn't be mixed. So we call those latent errors that kind of lie in wait and they go further down the line, and then that's the person that activates the error that then causes the consequence. So I want you, for the rest of the day, I want you to catch and notice and acknowledge your errors, and you'll see that you make a lot more than you realize. It doesn't mean we should all stay indoors and not go out and do anything. We just need to accept that it's normal and then go, what can we learn and what can we do about this, given where we're working, where we're operating, and thinking about the potential consequences of our said errors. So I want to go through a few types of human error. So the first one is a slip of action. So imagine you're driving your car, you've got your hands on the steering wheel, and you've got a number of levers. You might want to indicate, you might want to put your wipers on, you might want to put your lights on. They operate in similar ways. Have you ever gone to put the wipers on and you've indicated, or you put your lights on and you're like, oh, damn it, I didn't mean to do that? And I imagine we've experienced something like that. We didn't mean to do that. It was just a slip, really simple slip of action. Now, the consequences in that example are probably minor, if anything, but they often cause a bit of frustration. And that's something I also want you to acknowledge, is blame adds no value in the context of not blaming a worker for putting the wrong product in something, but also self-blame. That is not helpful at all. So have a bit more self-compassion for yourself when you make an error, because you're a human being. Now, what would make this more likely to happen is if you were driving a hire car, or you were driving someone else in your family's car where the levers are on a different way. So that unfamiliarity and the novel factor will make it more likely, because we can all drive cars, right? And there's nothing stopping you hiring a different car today and they just let you drive it. You don't have to do a course on it. But understand that those slip of actions can happen. Anyone ever done this? Keys in the fridge? Philippa's saying yeah. Or something similar, remote control in the wrong room, or I'm trying to find my phone, where have I put my phone? And it's like in the garden. I worked, as I said, in military aviation for a while, and I got to hang out with a load of fighter pilots, and they have got that swagger, and they wear the aviators and the flight suits, and there is an elite sense of superiority about them, and they are highly trained, highly skilled, do a really important and difficult job. And this guy was explaining that he was in the morning, he was eating his yogurt for breakfast, and then he needed to dash off to where he was going. So he had his empty yogurt pot in his hand and he had his car keys in his other hand. He went to the bin, threw his yogurt pot in, went to the car, went to open the car door. What did he have in his hand? The yogurt pot. Now, it doesn't mean he's stupid, doesn't mean he's incompetent, doesn't mean he needs to go on a training course, doesn't mean the company need to send a company-wide memo saying, don't throw your car keys in the bin. It just made a slip of action. And I say that in jest because I work with so many businesses where someone will make a human error, and in hindsight, other people looking on going, that was stupid. Why did they do that? And then they would retrain people, rebrief people, spend a lot of time and effort in reinforcing the rule or the procedure when that's not necessarily going to add any value. Now, if these keys that someone's inadvertently put in the fridge, if they're really integral to your business and they are keys for something really important that you need to get to at a moment's notice, then you would need to build a much more resilient system around the management of those keys. And you need to accept that if you don't have that resilient system, chances are your keys are going to get lost or be put in the wrong place. Something to think about. What about a lapse of memory? Ever forgot something important? Maybe if someone said to you, oh, I really need to buy that book or that file or that tool, can you bring it to me tomorrow? Oh yeah, of course, I've got it. Of course, I'll do that for you. And then you do nothing but jam it into your head and hope for the best. And then you show up the next morning and you see that person and they're like, have you got the thing? And you're like, oh no, why did I forget that? You forgot it because you're a human being. And we can't just jam stuff into our heads and hope that it all stays there. So we all have lapses of memory. But again, if the thing you need to remember is really important, then we need to build a much more resilient system to do it. If somebody asked you to bring something to them tomorrow, you probably already got ways to catch that error because you're like, oh, I've forgotten something before, I might forget it again. So what have you done to essentially nudge yourself to remember? Feel free to share if you've got a story.
I write things on my hand.
Yeah, yeah. Because then you can see it, right? It's right there. Or I put a post-it and stick it on the front door.
Yeah, if it's a physical piece of kit for a workshop, for example, I put it in my bag or the car boot when I remember it, even if it's 2 days before, just so I know where it is. Yeah.
It's very wise. Sometimes I will leave things by the front door, but still walk straight past them and drive off without them. It's just extraordinary.
Yeah, because your brain filters out loads of stuff that it doesn't think is important.
Just don't
So
feel
you've got to
them.
literally like hit yourself in the face with it. But again, human error is normal. We are all gonna forget stuff from time to time. And if you're working with a massive team of people, we cannot rely on those people remembering everything they're supposed to do all the time. We need to build a culture that makes it easy for them to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing. And then what we call a mistake is when you're doing the wrong thing, but you think it's right. So I've got a load of railway stories because I worked on the railway. And a friend of mine worked with train drivers. So a bad day, if you're a train driver, is pulling up to a station and the platforms are different lengths and the trains are different lengths. So you've got different number of carriages. When the train rocks up and is safe to do so, you push a button which unlocks the doors and allows the people onto the platform. But sometimes you drive up and the platform's on your right, and sometimes you drive into the station and the platform's on your left, and it's two different buttons, one for the right side and one for the left side. And this train company my friend was working with, the current trains, and obviously we've got loads of new rolling stock on our railways now, but there's also a lot of old stuff that's been around for years. These two buttons, the right side and the left side, similar to the B-17 bomber, look the same, interacted the same, and they were right next to each other. So it's very easy to just go, I think I'm in the station, it's on the right, push the left button, people open the doors, and people are just falling out onto a live track, which obviously is no good. But you think you're pushing the right button, but it's actually the wrong, but you don't know until the consequence realizes itself. And again, we all often do that. So here's a question then. What was the last error you made? And nobody can say, well, not me, I don't make errors, because I've already told you, you're going to make at least 5 to 7 an hour. And it's 9 o'clock now, so you've probably all been awake for at least a couple of hours. Anybody can think of an error they made today, yesterday, last week?
So yesterday, trying to be healthy, I was going into the office and I made myself a really healthy, lovely salad for lunch, put it in the fridge. This was 10 minutes before I was due to leave. And then 15 minutes into my drive, remembered it was still in the fridge. So I had it later on when I got home.
Again, but like in that moment, what words were you using
to
describe yourself?
You don't want to know what words I was. Yeah, it's just so frustrating.
Yeah, I get that it's frustrating, but I really want to hammer home the point that blame is not adding any value here. It's about what can we learn and what can we do to catch these errors in the future. But yeah, so did anyone eat your lunch or did you eat it when you got home?
No, I had it when I got home. Yeah,
okay, still a win then. But for the rest of the day, I want you to catch and acknowledge your errors. So again, the whole point of human factors, the whole point of understanding.
We've got a message in the chat actually about Claire Davis is fessing up. Claire, you're fessing up to putting your wet laundry in a basket that you hung out before this meeting, and you spent too long in the shower, so it's all still waiting, the wet laundry to be hung out. So that's very brave of you to confess that. So straight after this meeting, you need to put the wet laundry out. Otherwise it'll be terrible and you'll have to rewash it.
I feel your pain. My washing machine is often full of clean, wet washing that, as you know, if you leave it for too long, becomes dirty again. So the whole point of understanding human error and the whole point of human factors is we want to make it easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing. And just look at this sign. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. Am I pushing? Am I pulling? Am I not doing that? And again, there's loads of examples about this. So one thing to consider is the notion of error trap. So think about the B-17 bomber, the position of those toggle switches, that was an error trap because we were setting, whether we knew it or not, we were setting people up to fail. We were making it more likely that they would make an error given that physical context. If you work in a big office or you go into clients, most people have got fancy big whiteboards now and markers, and most people have got a big black smudge right across the middle of it. Why does that happen? Look at these two pens. They look identical, but they do two very different jobs. If you were going to grab a pen, you were in the middle full flow explaining something, you went to grab a pen to do an amazing like drawing on a whiteboard, and you picked up a permanent marker that was meant for a flip chart, you are going to ruin that whiteboard. And we probably all know a business that's got a whiteboard that's got that on. Does it mean I'm stupid if I do that? Does it mean I'm incompetent? Does it mean I need to go on a training course about how to use the right pen on the right board? No, I've been set up to fail because this is an error trap. The reason we get such similar packaging and things looking so similar is because the people that make these pens, Yamayo, they want their branding to be the most important thing. They want their pens to be recognizable in a bunch of other pens, and they don't care about the end user in getting it wrong. But that is an error trap, a really common one, that makes it easy to do the wrong thing when you want it to be easy to do the right thing. Another example, and this is really prevalent in healthcare and hospitals and pharmacies, that the people that make the drugs and the packaging looks very, very similar for the same reason about the pens. But if you look on the picture on the left, that is two different drugs and two different milligrams is like the dosage, the weight of it. How easy would it be, especially when they're stacked, if you would go into the cupboard to grab that prescription or that drug for a patient? How easy would it be to grab the wrong one? And there are so many medical errors in hospitals and doctors and pharmacies. And this is because there are so many error traps just lying in wait to make it easier to make an error. And there are things that healthcare have deployed to catch some of these errors, but we're not going to blame the person who grabbed the wrong box of tablets or the wrong pen because it was too easy. We've set them up to fail. So there's other ways we need to catch it. Another example. So I worked for a railway contractor and they have to do a lot of vegetation clearance on the side of the railway because it starts to encroach where the trains go, and it gets really thick, dense vegetation. So if you can see there, the light brown, that's big branches about this diameter that have been cut, and this is how thick the vegetation was. And then the blacky brown one that's going vertically across, if you can see, that is a high voltage cable. Same diameter, and because it's been deep in this vegetation over years, it's gone blacky browny, and it looks and feels like a branch. Now, this person was doing vegetation clearance at night because it's easier to stop trains at night than in the day. So the preferred time to do this was at night, so there's no lights. They couldn't shine a load of light on it because that would upset the line-side neighbours who were all sleeping. So if you imagine, if you will, again, I always got a lot of empathy for frontline workers. I've got all the gear on because I'm doing a really dangerous job. I've got a big visor on, I've got glasses on, I've got a mask on, I've got gloves on. It's raining, it's pitch black dark, and I'm chopping thick vegetation with a chainsaw. And then I cut through an electrical cable that's that thick. That is an error trap. That is lying in wait for me to chop it. Blaming me for chopping it, it's not going to add any value. Luckily, this was a redundant cable, so there was no live electricity in there, but that could have been Really, really devastating. And the reason it was laying in the vegetation and not buried underground is that railway workers, maintenance workers, often have to go out and replace cables, and they may leave the redundant ones there, and then they get lifted up through the vegetation over time, so they're just lying in wait. But sometimes new cables get surface laid and equally get lifted, so this could have been a live electrical cable. So much learning to be had, but only if we're curious enough to find the context and not jump to blaming the person who did it. A recent example from home. So I think it was a warm Saturday afternoon. I'm quite partial to a blackcurrant cider. And my daughter likes a bit of blackcurrant squash. We don't want to get those mixed up. But once these two things are poured into a glass, what do they look like? Exactly the same. So I'd put my blackcurrant cider on the side and she'd put her blackcurrant squash on the side. Luckily, it was me who made the error, picked up the squash and went, oh, I don't want squash. Where's my cider? But again, that's an error trap because it's too easy to pick the wrong one because they're so similar. And if you were working in a business that was using ingredients or components and they were stored in the same place looking the same, it's easy to pick the wrong one. And then just think about something as simple as trying to set a meeting up with someone. How many error traps are present when you're talking about dates and times and time zones? Or I'll meet you next Thursday at 2. Does she mean this Thursday or next Thursday? Because some people have a different interpretation of that. And I've missed numerous meetings or shown up to numerous meetings because there's been an inadvertent misunderstanding of when we were meeting. And obviously there's technology now that can catch some of those errors. But if you're just doing it on the fly in a message or a series of messages or emails, it's really easy to do that. So great way to do that is just to confirm back. To confirm, we're meeting on Thursday the 13th at 2, and that can then often nudge that misunderstanding out of it. So here's another question. I'll just pause. Can you think of any error traps that exist in your workplace or in your home or your life that you can think of, given I've given you a load of examples?
I work in a manufacturing environment.
Yeah.
And some ingredients look the same. They might be the same color and in the same color packaging, but the only difference is the label on the front.
Yeah. Nice. So what are you guys doing about that?
Well, after this, I'm gonna have to have a really good think about what we're doing about it.
Yeah. It's fascinating, isn't it? When you start to look at the world through this lens, I would argue that error traps are everywhere.
I work in a hospital and there is a lot of use of acronyms.
Yeah, great.
And sometimes, you know, people, I think it's not something I've come across, but in different medical specialties, you get the same acronym, but they mean 2 different diseases or 2 different treatments. So, you know, always checking, can I just check that this is what you mean by those letters? And I think I've got one colleague who uses acronyms for everything. Even things that are not commonly, you know, she just speaks in letters, and I always say, I don't understand. I feel like I need a dictionary to respond to you, but I don't think she realizes that she does it.
Yeah. Oh, well done for you. Again, being able to speak up and raise that and go, I'm not sure about that, or can you clarify? We need something called psychological safety to be able to speak up, because often it might be someone more senior than you or someone that you're not familiar with. And to be able to ask that question is really important to catch that error. But often people make that assumption that they know what it is and proceed that way. So it's great that you've got that ability to question that. But you're right, Claire, that acronyms, I mean, corporate businesses flipping love acronyms, don't they? But you're right. You'd have one project having one acronym that means one thing, and it means completely something different somewhere else. And the consequences could be significant.
I think, Becky, assumptions can also be another error trap. That people are assuming that one thing has happened or we're going to do something this way. And I'm just, from a personal point of view, I had a medical condition and it turned out to be actually something that was entirely curable, because I had a problem with part of my aorta, and everybody assumed I'd had a chest X-ray about 15 years earlier, and I hadn't.
Oh,
And there was this assumption that,
yeah.
And everybody therefore assumed that they assumed this course of action had happened, and therefore various things had been checked when they hadn't been.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, fascinating. But great that it got caught, but think of the time delay in catching it. Yeah, so we always say have a questioning attitude, which is what Claire described, when you hear something, and be kind of on the lookout for something that maybe then a miscommunication or assumptions being made that could then make it more likely that errors will happen. I'm going to move on to something called organizational drift. And this was developed by an amazing chap called Sidney Decker, who does loads of work in this space from an aviation background, but he does a lot of work in healthcare now as well. And this is notion of a graph. So time along the bottom and then standards up the top. So regardless of what your business does, whether it makes pies or delivers a service as consultant, you've got standards for the way that you do the things you do, because you need to have some kind of processes, procedures written in some form of how you do stuff around here. So the black line along the top is what we call the work as imagined, which is the written down plan of the thing, the task, the jobs you're going to do. But over time, and when people get to work in reality, there's loads of context that changes in the environment and the team setup and the tasks and the products and the client brief. That means work is done, which is what happens in reality, which is this yellow line, actually ebbs and flows. Sometimes it goes above and beyond what we plan to do, and that's innovation, because people will naturally do stuff quicker and better and faster and more efficient. But over time, it drifts away from those standards. And what we call the gap between work as imagined and work as done, we call that drift. Now, some businesses will go out and do audits. And if you've got ISO standards, you're going to be checking that this work as imagined line is what's happening in real life. And often you find a gap. And one way to interpret that drift gap is to call it non-compliance. It's the same thing, but often when we call it non-compliance, it's quite a negative term. And then we just try and bring everyone back to the work as imagined line without seeking the context as to why we've drifted. So I much prefer drift over non-compliance, because it leaves us open to understanding the context without blaming everybody that's doing something slightly different. And in this part of the graph, nothing bad has happened. But if this drift were to continue, you could potentially drift into failure. And then at that point, you do a big investigation and you'd see that big, massive gap. What this graph argues is that drift is there now, before anything's gone wrong. And we can go and find that drift now, understand the context, and do something about it. So I want to give you an example of drift. So I worked for a cider manufacturer. I won't tell you which one because it wouldn't be fair to them. And they had a really long production line. So they would make the cider, they would put it into glass bottles. The glass bottles would go along, get a label, get a lid, go on a pallet, and a lorry would take them to where people needed to buy the cider. So really long production line. As you can imagine, glass is fragile, and loads of bottles, and they do go into a bottleneck. And if you've seen it on a production line, you know that's why they call it a bottleneck, because they literally go up, go into a single file, and often the glass bottles break. Now, the work as imagined, the procedure and the rule was that if a glass bottle broke, you would stop production, clean it up, and that would be for two reasons. One, because glass is a hazard to people working the line, and two, glass is a hazard to the cider because you don't want it to get into the bottles that are then going to go for human consumption. So that work as imagined line, the rule, the procedure was really important. But this business had just really ramped up production, and their production line had gone from a 12-hour to a 24-hour. So they were running 24 hours a day, and they needed to run 24 hours a day to meet the new production. So if they kept stopping the line, because if I stop the line here, it stops the whole line, to clean up some glass bottles, it would have a negative impact on meeting the production targets. And production was king, because we wanted to get the product out the door to the people that bought it. So over time, it became routine to not clean up the glass bottles. They would just kick it under the line, put a bit of cardboard down, do the best they could. Because if I was a worker and I stopped the line, there were people telling me, what are you doing? We're not stopping this line. Production is king. So this was drift, because we drifted away from the standard. But if we were just to call that non-compliance and blame the people not following the rules, it would be really unfair, because there was context driving the behavior of these teams. And that's why when you compare drift to non-compliance, for me, it really misses that opportunity to understand the context and to do something about it.
And
So
Becky, Rachel's got a comment on that, just saying that she really likes the phrase of growth mindset with drift as opposed to non-compliance. I don't know, Rachel, whether you want to add to that.
Sorry, I'm on a really little screen. I couldn't get off mute. Yeah, no, it just resonates. Just some of the stuff we're doing at the moment. That idea of drift versus yeah, the kind of the big stick of non-compliance.
Yes. What kind of environment do you work in?
So I'm at a university, but I'm on the professional services side. But I'm kind of thinking kind of really broadly at the moment. So
yeah.
But yeah, I'm ex-railway as well. So
okay, cool, nice. Awesome. So yeah, this is Jen, just a suggestion to consider this stuff as drift, seek to find the context, then do something proactive about it, rather than like you said, Rachel, the big stick of non-compliance, a big report, big red things on a big form that then drive everyone to, okay, we'll just pretend it's fine to pass this audit, and then we're going to slowly drift back down because no one's doing anything to make it better around here. So I want to give you a few examples of drift. So the first one is unintentional. So you believe that you're following the rule, the workers imagine line is followed from your ideas, your perspective. So let's go back to COVID times. I like that we can say, let's go back to COVID times. The rules around what we should do or not do around COVID changed literally every 5 seconds, didn't they? Am I supposed to isolate for 10 days, 12 days, 14 days, 6 weeks? I get a test then I do that test, and then I wait for 2 days. I wear a mask, I don't wear a mask. It was crazy. So you could have unintendedly drift away from the rule, but you believe you're doing the right thing. And again, it's coming from a good place. I'm not getting up in the morning thinking, I know what I'm going to break all the rules. But if the rules are unambiguous, or they change so much, or I got trained one way and then Paul got trained a different way, we believe we're doing the right thing, but we're not, until we go and look at this and understand where the drift is and the reasons why. Only then can we do something about it. Another type of drift is routine. So we've normalized a culture of rule breaking, and speed limits is a fantastic example of this. If the speed limit says 20, most people are doing 25, if not 30. If the speed limit is 70, most people are doing 75, if not 80, if not more. And it drifts over time. We know that's the rule, the standard, the workers imagine, but we are drifting away. It's probably because there's no consequence. Probably because nobody's telling us it's good or bad. And we've just normalized the culture of breaking this rule. Now, one thing to consider is this rule a rule that we need? Do we need to hunker down on this rule? Or is there a level of flexibility to allow this drift? And this example of this path is perfect. So if the workers imagined is to follow the paved path on the left, what is workers done? Everyone's taken a shortcut, right, across the grass, because it's quicker and it's easier, and I want to get there, so I'm not going to go around the long way. People are like water or lemons. They want to go the path of least resistance. It's in our human nature. So we could call that non-compliance and bash everyone over the head about taking the wrong path, but we're not making it easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing. What we could do here, if there were no consequences of taking that other path, is go, well, you can use any path. And then we relax that work as a Madden rule and we redesign it to make it suit what people are doing. Or if taking that path across the grass actually is really bad and hazardous and we don't want it, then we need to stop people. We need to put a fence up. We need to make it hard to go that way and easy to go that way so people then flow the way you want them to do. But that would be a great example of routine drift. We've just normalized it over time to where we all do that. And then the last one is all about is situational drift. So I can't do my job and follow your rule or your procedure or your policy because they're two things that are conflicting. So I worked on a big job with a massive scaffolding that was still being erected. And when you got to the top, because there were lots of unprotected edges, to get around this building, you had to clip on. So that was a rule and it made sense. It was an important rule. But there was a part of the building around this corner where there wasn't a suitable anchor point to clip on, but it was only one step over and there wasn't a big edge. So I couldn't get around there and the people accessing that way couldn't get round and clip on. So we needed to do that to do our job, but we were going against the rule, not because we were reckless, because we couldn't do our job and follow the rule. Another example is I worked for a company that did inspections on cars and lorries, and everyone was required to wear a bump cap. So it's like a cap, it's got a big hard bit in. So if you donked your head, it'd be fine. But they had a peak on. Made sense, it was easy, everyone had a cap, they were comfy, it was fine. But if you were looking up at the underside of a vehicle and looking in to inspect, say, the brakes or something, your peak got in the way, and so you were banging your peak. So they would take the hats off so they could do their job. Now, someone could come along and go, that's non-compliance, you're breaking the rules, you're not being safe, get your hat on. But then these people couldn't do their job and follow the rule. So if we have an open conversation about it in a non-aggressive, you're in trouble kind of way, we can then go, oh, it makes sense. And then they purchase caps with what we call micro peak. So they've still got the protection on the head, but they've got nothing getting in the way. They now can do their job and follow the rule. And this is what we really want to encourage in your businesses, is having conversations around where your drift is and what's the context why. Because context drives the behavior that you're getting in your workplace. So think about a cash machine. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was a really common error that would happen with cash machines that doesn't happen today. Can anybody think what it could be? And it might have happened to you.
Is it that you would walk away without your bank card?
Yes. Yeah. Do you remember why?
I think because it came out after you'd taken your money.
Yeah. So why would you take your money and then walk off?
You got what you came for.
Yes. So people go to cash machines to get cash. They put the card in, do the number. If it gives you the cash, you take the cash, you're like, job done, I'm off. And then people would leave their cards. The machine would then be intelligent enough to catch that error, suck the card back in, but then you'd have to cancel all your cards. The machine was then full of cards. It was a massive problem. Now, in the old view of addressing this human error, and the old view that some of the business I worked for 10 years ago would do, is I would send everybody on a training course that says, don't forget your card. I'd put a big neon sign saying, don't forget your card. And I would try and fix those pesky humans for making mistakes. What does the cash machine do now to catch that error?
Yeah, card comes out before the cash.
Card comes out first, so it's nudging you, and it does it make a song and dance about it?
Oh, it makes a beeping noise.
Makes a beeping noise, and it won't give you your cash until you take your card. Because it knows we're human beings, it knows we're goal focused. It knows that context drives behavior. If I've gone to the cash point to get cash, once I got my cash, I'm out of here. But it knows it makes sense that you have your card back as well, so you can get cash tomorrow. So we've changed the system rather than changing the person, because it's really hard to change people, especially when there's millions of them. So if we can change the system in which people interface with our machines and our processes, we get a much better sustainable result.
Becky, can I just say there's a comment from Nick in the chat about, he says, a lot of what I'm hearing is about risk assessment, which is often, but not.
Oh, you've gone on mute, Chris.
I'm sorry. Nick Bish, there's a comment from Nick saying a lot of what he's hearing is about risk assessment, which is often, but not always, influential in areas of action or neglect. I don't know if you've got any response there to Nick. And can I also just say, it's 9:35, we're in the last sort of 20 minutes, Becky, just so you... Thanks.
Yeah, great question. And yeah, having spent 10 years in health and safety, I've been involved in a lot of risk assessments, but they often live in this utopia where they rely on people being perfect all the time. And there's a lot of reliance on people doing the right thing in the moment, and not enough around building a resilient system to enable people to drive them to do the right thing. So yeah, risk assessment definitely plays a part. I often think it doesn't dive deep enough into the realities of how people interface with work. Yeah, I'm coming to the final stretch. So look at this woman, and I've been this woman. What is the context that is driving the behavior of this woman carrying all of her shopping in her arms from the supermarket to her car?
She doesn't want to pay for a bag.
Yeah, she doesn't want to pay for her bag.
She went in for one thing and came out with 10.
Yeah.
She didn't need to go shopping.
Yeah. But would you see this image? So does this make sense to you? Can we appreciate the context that this makes sense rather than judging that woman going, why is she carrying it all when she could have just put it in a bag? Because we've probably all been there. She's probably got a boot full of bags, or she's got a dedicated drawer at home for bags for life because she's invested. But we forget our bags. Now, 10 years ago, you wouldn't see this, would you? Because you could have a plethora of bags. You can double bag if you want. So context changes, but it's the context that drives the behavior. So if you want to understand the behavior, you have to understand the context rather than jump into judgment of what you can see on face value. And if you think back to the glass bottles in the cider factory, the context of production being the #1 focus drove the behaviors of those production workers not stopping the production line. So rather than blaming the production workers, which often happens, we need to understand the context that is driving the behavior and get to the point where you're like, it makes sense why that person did what they did or didn't do what they did, now that I understand the context. And so blame is not going to add value. And there's another chap that I love called Todd Conklin, and he says you can blame and punish, or you can learn and improve, but you can't do both. So you have to pick. And my default is we want to learn, we want to improve, so we need to just park our blame. But parking our blame is really hard because as a society, as a country, as businesses often, we love to blame. Blaming is quick, it is easy, it's probably worked for us in the past, and we are surrounded by blame. You've only got to look at the front pages of newspapers and the headlines on the news. We're blaming the head of social services for that. We're blaming that politician for that. We're blaming the head of that business for that thing. Blame feels good. It's quick and easy and dirty, but we lose the opportunity to learn if we jump to blame. So my advice is to be curious. You can't be curious on your own because that's just nosy. You want to be curious and non-judgmental. Seek to understand the context before you jump in. So I'm gonna wrap it up there and say, what can you do following this session? You can go away and accept the human error is normal and you're going to make mistakes. And all the people that you work with and interface with and help are also going to make mistakes. So what can we do to acknowledge and learn from that? You're going to go out and seek to find the context, because it's the context that is driving the behavior that you're seeing. And it might be the good behavior, it might be the unintended behavior. Don't jump to blame, even though we're surrounded by people that are blaming left, right, and center, but choose not to. Choose to be curious and non-judgmental and look to learn and to find ways to catch these errors. And then we're going to be in a much better place. So I will stop sharing that and then we can assess what we're up to.
And Becky, there are some really interesting comments in the chat. I think, Rushi, you had said about a cancel, having a cancel culture. I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about that, because I think it was when Becky was talking about blame.
Yeah, I think nowadays your point about it, as soon as you make a mistake, it's all over the media. I mean, the very election process we're going through, everything is just blaming everybody. But there's this new generation of social media. There's a lot of if you're talking about, we learn from our mistakes and we move on and we actually create a better process to reduce mistakes. But with social media, actually, people have nowhere to hide now. So if they make a mistake and people get onto the bandwagon of that mistake, before you know it, they are persona non grata. So there's a real balance between giving people the space to learn and evolve, giving organizations, I mean, I didn't hear risk assessment, I heard continuous improvement and iteration. That's how my mind works. But how do we create the space to give people license to improve and learn and have an open mindset, rather than fall into this trap of blame and cancel culture? That's kind of where I was coming from.
Well, I think, and again, it is hard, but I say we start by leading by example, and we start by having more conversations about accepting that humans are absolutely fantastic, innovative, adaptable, but we're also fallible, and we have to learn from our mistakes. So being a positive influence in that space, and regardless of what's going on in society and in the media and social media, inside your own businesses, wherever you work, you have full influence to run that and manage that and learn from that however you want. So I think if businesses start to do this and they've got a public influence, especially larger businesses, so like the CEO of Brewdog famously came out and he's written a book saying the 10 mistakes I've made as a CEO, and he's like, I'm putting my hand up, I've made mistakes, but look what I've learned. And we need more people standing up, putting their hands up and saying, look, I made a mistake, but I'm a human being, but this is what I've learned. We can then tip that balance. And then if people in the corner want to blame people and cancel people, we'll leave them to it. But I think we need to uprise and demonstrate the evolution of humans is this continuous improvement and learning, and not we're going to blame Bob because Bob touched it last.
And I think somebody's put in the chat about blame is really demotivating, the importance of actually reviewing what we do. And certainly it's something we talk about a lot in GameShift, about actually how do you build in learning into what you do, because rather and do it as you keep going. And I really like that fact that blame is really demotivating, because then it makes a blame, it's then a them and us, or a you and me. Makes opposite sides.
Blame will silence a whole workforce. I'm not putting my head above the parapet because Bob just got the sack or Bob just got blamed. I'm not saying anything. And then all that workforce knowledge is then trapped within your workforce, and then you've not got the opportunity to learn.
But then Claire was saying that, for example, in the NHS, there's that becoming much better at investigating patient safety incidents. But then again, there's the thing about clashing with coroners, because their role judicially is actually to apportion blame in terms of what's happening. I don't know, Claire, if you want to say any more about that.
Yeah, so it's a fairly new sort of national framework for patient safety incident reviews. And it's absolutely picking up the themes that we've been talking about this morning about, you know, nobody comes in to work to kill a patient, but sometimes it's it's systematic errors. It's, you know, it's all for all of the human error and what we need. So the new framework is about not blaming, but really learning and not just investigating the same old things that we always do, but working out why we haven't learned and why we haven't changed. But yeah, it's a new framework introduced in the last year. But yeah, what we're finding at the hospital I work with is that the coroner's office is really, really uncomfortable with the sorts of reports that we're now sending them, because they're not saying, you know, this man did a bad thing and that's why this patient died, because the culture is they're not aligning yet. So I'm sure, you know, this is something that will evolve, but at the moment it's quite troublesome, because NHS England has changed, but the coroner's office hasn't been in the process from the beginning.
Ed, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I might build on Claire's point in that again, NHS environment, that we've got situations where there are fixes built on workarounds, built on, you know, like you've got multiple layers of the process as intended, and actually what happens, they're just layered on top of each other. So for someone to do a half decent job, they have to be relatively innovative or kind of well connected in terms of how they get stuff done. And I'm just kind of curious, Becky, from your point of view, in terms of how do you start unraveling that kind of knotted ball of string without kind of sending, you know, an organization into overwhelm or paralysis or whatever.
And it is difficult because you want to pause and, like you say, unravel and unpick some of that stuff. But equally, someone like the NHS or the railway, they've just got to keep going. So you've got to still keep driving the train and then pause long enough to remove and always declutter some of that. So in the railway, when something went wrong, they'd be like, that's the standard, but we were here. Let's just throw in 6 more layers to make it more robust. But they're not realizing that the original plan or process or procedure was flawed so much that you're just putting sticking plasters on, and over time it builds up and builds up, and then you've got this real conflicting mess that people on the front line are dealing with. So you have to pause long enough and then go into that in an open discussion with all the people involved at all the levels and go, talk to me about this. And that needs to happen before something goes wrong, because once something goes wrong, I'm not going to say anything because I'm not going to get involved in this, especially when you've got the coroner and you've got the media and you've got outside stakeholders involved. The best opportunity is to do it now. We know there's layers and layers and layers, sticking plasters. Let's do it now before the next thing goes wrong, because the next thing is coming. We are drifting into the next failure. So let's find it now, and people are more likely to share and be open because there's that appetite to learn and improve rather than to find out who's to blame for the last thing that went wrong.
Can I ask, Becky, you've talked a lot, obviously, in your experience, a lot around NHS, railways, aviation, anything where stuff is done, where there's a sort of physical stuff. And then I'm just thinking about other more purely knowledge-based organizations, professional services, that type of thing. What's your experience of human error in that, and how it might be the same or different to what happens in organizations where there's more, if you like, physical manifestation of when things go wrong?
I would say those errors are still there. They just show up more in a more obvious way when people are doing physical work. The consequences realize themselves easier. But for example, something that's wrong in an instruction or a report that then goes out to the wrong person, there's misinterpretation of something or instruction or report. a misinstruction to your client, you can then get reputational damage. You can get people that are frustrated with, oh, it's a nightmare to work here because I'm so confused about this stuff. So it definitely plays out. It's just it's a more lower level noise than the big stuff that kind of comes and literally hits you in the face, but it's still there. And I'd say my advice to those kinds of organizations is, again, like I said to Edward, is pause. And I do something called a learning team, which is a facilitated conversation about what's it like to work here. Tell me what frustrates the hell out of you about working here and give me some examples. And then you'll find the error traps and the drift, because those things manifest as frustrations for people that work here. And if you allow people the time and space to talk about what's annoying, what's frustrating, what would you change if you had the time and the effort and the money, then you can get to the tangible things you can fix and improve to catch some of this stuff.
Can I add a comment? First of all, Becky, thank you. It's been absolutely fantastic. So as some of you know, I'm a GameShift partner focusing on organizational development and a background in psychology, and I'm a professional jazz musician. So I've got a weird view of the world because I like mistakes. But you said, Becky, before, you said for the rest of the day, catch and acknowledge your errors. So I will try that. But there's something that I sometimes do, which is it's around what I might call a purposeful error. I would say walk around and break stuff and see what happens. Now that's a little bit, can be dangerous, but you can do it in a safe way. And I know that often people, I used to do a lot of work in environmental management with health and safety people, and everyone would say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? But the thing I'm saying is you walk around saying, well, if it ain't broke, let's break it and see what happens.
Yeah.
Now, you know, I just think it's an interesting way to look at the world. I suppose you've got to be, maybe you need to, it's a thought experiment. You can't actually go around a factory and break stuff, but you could say, if that didn't do that thing, what might the consequence be? So I'm just saying that's just a comment from me. So it's a thing I sometimes do with people. I ask people to go around and break things and see what happens, which is kind of what we do.
I suggest that frontline workforces are already doing that, because they're not purposely breaking stuff. They're just pushing the boundary a tiny bit and a tiny bit, because like I said, they're like water. They want the path of least resistance. They want to get stuff done in the quickest, most efficient way, and they will be pushing that boundary, and that's causing that drift. But actually, they might be in a much better position. So people would be naturally testing those boundaries. And the way to understand all that is to go out where the work gets done with the people that do it and go, show me what you do here, and be really curious and non-judgmental about it. And you'll see those nuances and those little nuggets of innovation. Like you said, oh, we've been doing like this for 10 years now, and it's much better than what's written down in the policy, but I keep getting a non-conformance. So when the boss comes round, I change it to that, but this is what we do because it's much better. Like those shortcuts and so a shortcut for me is an innovation. Shortcut is a negative view of it, and an innovation is a positive view. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I'm really conscious that we're in the last few minutes. I just want to give space if anybody has final question or closing comments they'd like to do before we ask you to finish off, Becky. And Howard, I was just wondering whether, because of all the air, the pilot, Howard's a pilot, Becky. So I'm just wondering whether anything from this relates to your world, Howard.
Absolutely, yes. It's why I was so intrigued to come this morning. So thank you so much, Becky. You've given a sort of different slant on some stuff I'm familiar with, and my first career was in rail as well. So I think maybe we should have a chat afterwards if you'd be up for it. But thank you so much, and you've there's some other really interesting ideas as well. So thank you for that.
No worries.
Fantastic. I mean, Becky, we could probably do a whole other one of these based on what well, first of all, I know you could teach a master's degree in this anyway, so you've got 2 years of material. But also, I'd quite like to explore one day some of how this relates to the human dynamics of like an executive team, where they're not fixing stuff at all. There is no machinery, there is no process, but all of these error traps and slips and mistakes are going on all the time in exec meetings, board meetings, and they show up in all kinds of ways. So it's fascinating stuff. Is there anything, Becky, you want to say before we, just to finish off, before we close?
No, just that again, I'm really passionate and fascinated with this subject. I love humans. I love how they interact with stuff. And my kind of ethos, my message is let's just all be a little bit more empathetic and compassionate, not only for ourselves when we make errors, but for all the people we interact to, because it's so easy to jump to judgment and blame when actually we don't know how it made sense for them to do what they did, given what was in front of them. So yeah, take a step back, pause, and be curious and non-judgmental. I'm going to get t-shirts with that made because it's my favorite saying.
Brilliant. We will so if you can come up with a quick design of the t-shirt, we'll send the image out as part of the follow-up. What we're going to do is, as usual, we will share the recording of this session with the people on it and with the people who wanted to be here but couldn't come. I'll do a little blog about my personal reflections on it, and we'll include in that the invitation to the next pop-up. We're still working on the date, but we think it's going to be July the 16th. We're just waiting for confirmation. And the next one is based on palliative care. So we've got Gemma Lloyd with us, who's a palliative care specialist. We're going to be looking at how do you work creatively when things can't be fixed? How do you work compassionately with endings? All of the different kind of endings that happen in organisations. So we're partly we're referring to the book of there's kind of a famous book out at the moment called Hospicing Modernity. We're also going to be looking at just what palliative care is and what it's for and what good looks like in palliative care, and looking for how that relates to our organisational life. So that's coming next. You'll all get an invitation. Meanwhile, thank you for coming. And Becky, as ever, thank you so much for being brilliant. It's great to have you here.
Cheers.
Yeah. Thank you all, everybody.